Hi everybody. So I promised you that I would get you some information on how to do a simple at-home screening for vestibular function. And today I want to walk you through how to go about doing that. So if you want to know today if your child has poor vestibular function, there is a pretty simple way to test. I mean, obviously the vestibular system is more complex than just the screening, but it's a pretty good place to start. So basically what the purpose to checking for vestibular function, if you've been following me for a while, you probably already know this, and that is that we're not just checking to see if your child has balance or not, we're checking to see if their lower brain levels are developed. So if the vestibular system is well developed, that means that the cortex, your child's higher brain levels, where they do all of that reasoning, planning, forethought, impulse control, organization, all of that type of stuff, that cortex is free to do all of that work, right? So just keep in mind the lower brain levels, such as where the vestibular function happens and where the vestibular system exists, is those lower brain levels are for survival purposes. They are what allows us to navigate the world safely. And if that vestibular system or other parts of the lower brain levels are not developed, those survival functions will suddenly basically the cortex will take over or compensate for the weaknesses in those lower brain levels, because those survival mechanisms have to come first before the brain starts worrying about planning and reasoning and all of that type of stuff. It's the more primitive brain. It's what allows us to, function and manage in the world and so forth. So also important to know that the vestibular system can be really underdeveloped. It can be mildly underdeveloped. It can be severely underdeveloped. It is in varying degrees. And generally that is connected to how severely impaired, if you will, both the cognition, attention, eye control, all of that type of stuff I've been talking about in the last few weeks, how much that can be affected. So the bottom line is that if the vestibular system, the lower brain levels are not developed, then the higher brain levels, the cortex, is not free to do its job. It's having to take over the job of the lower brain levels. And what I often compare it to is it's like you've shown up to work and, so-and-so is not at work. And so you have to take over their job, and you're really not trained for that job. You're trained for a job that maybe requires a lot more skill, but this job absolutely has to be done for anything else to happen. So you're kind of trying to manage both. And I think we've, in varying degrees, have all been in that situation. Even, in a partnership, in a marriage, we're in situations like that where someone's not home or they're gone away for a week or the weekend, and we're having to kind of juggle. So then things are not being done as smoothly as they can be. And that's exactly why so many kids are struggling with learning difficulties, behavior, and so forth. So what is the screening, the simple test you can do? So balance on one leg. It's as simple as that. Have your child stand and ask them to, it doesn't matter if they lift their right leg or their left leg, putting their hands on their shoulders across, and just to start, have them balance on one leg. If they start to wobble, that's a pretty big clue already that they have poor vestibular function. But what you really want to do is you want to do what's called the cortex challenge. So you want to see if the cortex is taking over the job of the lower brain levels. And the easiest way to do that is while they're balancing, ask them a question like an open-ended question like, tell me about what is in your bedroom. What did you eat this morning for breakfast? What did you do yesterday? What do you plan on doing this weekend? It doesn't have to be super complicated. If you know your child knows their times tables fairly well, you could ask them that. I mean, even if they don't, but if they absolutely don't, then obviously, even if they had their legs on the floor, both legs on the floor, they're not going to be able to answer that. So it's basically what that's going to tell you is if they start to wobble more as they are answering this question. A lot of kids, when I'm screening them in my office, they will put their leg down, or they will really start to wobble, or they will sometimes just kind of stop talking. Like they can't answer the question and maintain their balance at the same time. And that tells me right there, because the vestibular system is such a crucial part of the lower brain levels and brain development, that this is why this child is working so hard to learn, so hard to read, so hard to focus, to manage their emotional responses. And by the way, when I screen kids, sometimes the parents, I'm screening them as well, because they want to, play along and do it with their child. And the parent will say that they, notice that they aren't able to really perform the screening either. And so obviously it's not just kids that struggle with this. There's adults who, manage, but they get by on all these compensations they've developed, and they've learned to live with these limitations, but maybe it's affecting their emotional regulation, their impulse control, all of that type of stuff. So it's definitely not something that is limited to kids. So just keep in mind, the cortex cannot do two jobs. So the cortex will always assist with the lower brain levels because it is a survival function. But ultimately, if we want our kids to have the best brain possible, we want to free up the cortex from having to do the job of the lower brain levels, such as vestibular function, and we want them to be able to optimize the ability of their cortex to reason, plan, think, and so forth. So bottom line is that is the first kind of layer of screening. I'm in the next little bit, I'm going to be walking through different areas of brain development and what are called primitive reflexes, to check if other parts of your childhood baby brain, so to speak, is still on, and what those specific if they can't sort of pass that screening, what that will indicate in terms of what areas that can affect. Because sometimes it can get really, really specific. Like one particular reflex that's retained in 90% of my clients is the Moro reflex. And a lot of adults have this retained reflex as well. And it will very easily send someone into fight or flight. It will very easily make them, whether I find with boys, when they're kids, it tends to be more like aggression, impulsivity, hyperactivity. With girls, it can present as that. It tends to more typically present as anxiety, panic, and so forth. And again, this can be retained in adults as well. And once you start addressing this reflex that isn't integrated properly into the nervous system and start doing exercises to retrain it, then all of a sudden that can really calm things down. I just had a client 2 weeks ago say this is the first time her son has been able to sit down. The entire week he was able to sit down. He didn't immediately go into fight or flight the minute the schoolwork started getting frustrated. And what we were really working on was his Moro reflex in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So anyway, stay tuned. Try the test at home. Let me know in the comments below how it goes. I will be checking in my Facebook group, Building Better Brains, to see how everyone fared out with the test and what they discovered with the Cortex Challenge. So thanks for watching, everybody. And if you haven't grabbed my free starter kit, the Laser Focus Learner, grab that. I will pop that in the comments below. Have a good day.